Mortal silence, what I experienced that night, still haunts me to this day. And even now, I don't know if it was real or if my mind was trying to protect me. All I know is that silence has never been the same for me again. I have always been a skeptic. I never believed in ghost stories, hauntings, or anything of the sort. My world was always based on what I could see, touch, and explain. But some things don't need your belief to exist. They simply are, waiting patiently for the day. Without warning, you finally notice them. This story began when I moved into an old house in a secluded neighborhood. It wasn't one of those Victorian mansions from horror movies, but a simple 2-story house with large windows and an absolute silence that hung over the place. It was that silence that unsettled me from the very first moment. There was no sound of wind rustling the trees, no distant cars, not even the occasional noise from neighbors. Just an oppressive silence, as if the world outside had been swallowed by something invisible. I tried to ignore the feeling for the first few days. I convinced myself that it was just me adjusting to a new environment, an old house with thick walls that muffled external sounds. But something was wrong. On the first night, while organizing my things, I heard a creak. Not the usual creaks of settling in the cold of night, but a rhythmic sound, like dragging footsteps in the hallway. I froze for a moment, holding my breath. When silence returned to the room, I laughed at myself. It's just the house settling, I thought. But the next night, the same sound. Slow, dragging footsteps. They couldn't be the house. They were deliberate, hesitant, pacing back and forth. This time, I couldn't ignore it. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, stepping out of my room to check every corner of the house. Nothing. No open windows, no unlocked doors. No sign that anyone had entered. But the silence felt heavier now, as if something was watching. In the following days, things escalated. The silence of the house was no longer just unsettling. It became unbearable. I began to feel inexplicable chills, shivers running down my spine as if something was too close. Though I never saw anything, the air felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't explain. But the worst happened on the 4th night. I woke up in the middle of the night, breathing heavily, my heart pounding in my chest. Something was wrong. The darkness in the room seemed deeper than it should be, as if the moonlight that usually illuminated part of it had been swallowed by an invisible shadow. Then I realized the silence wasn't just there. It had stopped. Until that moment, even subtly, there had always been some background noise, my own breathing, the faint hum of electricity, the rustling of sheets when I moved. But now there was nothing, not even the sound of my own breath. It was as if the world around me had been swallowed by an absolute void. And then I heard it, a whisper, low, dragged, coming from within the darkness. You finally heard. My body froze. My eyes widened, but I couldn't see anything, only that impenetrable darkness and the certainty that someone was there with me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my mouth. My own voice had been stolen by the silence. The only thing I could do was feel. Something was there, right next to me, and then I felt a cold breath against my ear. Now you are part of the silence. And that's how my descent into the nightmare began. I don't know how long I remained paralyzed. It could have been seconds or hours, but at that moment, time lost all meaning. The silence around me was absolute, suffocating, as if it had become its own entity, something that crawled through the darkness and seeped into my bones. I couldn't move. My mind screamed for me to get out of there, but my body refused to respond. The whisper still echoed in my head, as if it had imprinted itself within me. Now you are part of the silence. Then something changed. A creak, small, discreet, but loud enough to pull me out of my trance of pure terror. My fingers moved, then my arms. It was as if I was breaking free from a stupor, as if that presence had kept me still, and now, for some reason, it had loosened its grip on me. My vision slowly adjusted to the darkness of the room. Everything seemed the same, but something inside me knew it wasn't. I took a deep breath, feeling the air enter my lungs with a difficulty that shouldn't have been there. Finally, I gathered enough courage to move. With slow gestures, I reached for my phone on the nightstand and pressed the flashlight button. The beam of light cut through the darkness instantly. Nothing. Nothing but my own room, exactly as I had left it before sleeping. But then one detail made my blood run cold. The door. I always slept with it closed. Always. And now it was slightly open. A small gap, narrow enough not to be immediately noticeable, but large enough for someone to have entered. Or worse, for someone to still be inside. My hand trembled as I pointed the light toward the crack in the door. The hallway beyond it was just a tunnel of darkness. The feeling that I wasn't alone intensified. My heart pounded so hard I could hear in the oppressive silence that engulfed everything. Then the door moved, just a few inches. A faint creak, almost imperceptible, but echoed inside me like thunder. I held my breath. My mind screamed that it was a wind, that maybe I had left it slightly ajar, that it was just an old house creaking in the middle of the night. But I knew it wasn't, because there was something on the other side of the door. And then the silence died. A whisper, low, hoarse. "You let me in." My body reacted before my brain could, in a desperate impulse. I jumped out of bed and ran to the door, slamming it shut and locking it with trembling fingers. I stood there, pressed against the wood, trying to hear any sound from the other side. Nothing. The silence had returned. But now I knew it wasn't empty. It was waiting. I spent the rest of the night curled up against the headboard, clutching my phone, as if its dim light could protect me from whatever was there with me. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I cautiously stepped out of my room. The hallway was empty, bathed in the dim light filtering through the house's windows. Everything looked normal, but I knew it wasn't. And the worst part? The front door was unlocked. I was sure I had locked it before sleeping, but now it was just ajar, as if something had left. Or worse, as if it had just entered. And at that moment, I understood the silence was never just silence. It was listening, and now it had found me. I stood frozen at the threshold of my bedroom, staring at the front door. It was slightly ajar, barely enough to notice, but that small gap was enough to confirm what I feared the most. Something had been inside, or maybe it still was. The weight of the silence pressed against my chest like an invisible force. The air felt thicker, heavier, as if the walls of the house had shifted overnight, closing in around me. I took a hesitant step forward, my breath shaky, my heart hammering inside my rib cage. I needed to check the house. I needed to know if I was truly alone. Each step across the wooden floor echoed unnaturally in the quiet. The kitchen, empty. The living room, untouched. The windows were all shut, their lock secure. Everything appeared exactly as I had left it the night before, except for front door, and yet something felt wrong. As I reached for the door handle, intending to shut and lock it, a sharp chill ran down my spine. It was an instinctive, primal warning, like an unseen force whispering to me that I shouldn't touch it. I hesitated. The silence pulsed around me, like a living thing holding its breath. Then, before I could react, bang. A deafening knock thundered against the door, sending a jolt through my entire body. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. The sound reverberated through the house, slicing through the silence like a jagged blade. Another knock, then another, each one stronger than the last, as if whatever was outside was growing impatient. I turned to run, but then a voice, muffled, distorted, but familiar, let me in. I froze. My body refused to move, every muscle locked in place, because the voice was mine. It was speaking in my exact tone, my exact cadence, but it was wrong, hollow, empty, as if the words were being repeated by something that didn't fully understand them. "Let me in," it said again. A creeping sense of dread filled my chest, my throat tightening as I stared at the door. My hands clenched into fists. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But I didn't, because deep down I already knew the truth. I had never left the silence, and now it wanted me back. I took a step back, my entire body trembling. My own voice, warped empty, repeated the same chilling demand. "Let me in." The air in the house felt heavier, pressing against my skin like a suffocating fog. My pulse pounded in my ears. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to escape, but to where? There was nowhere to go. Then the knocking stopped. The silence returned. But this time, it was different. Before, the silence had felt empty, like an absence of sound. Now it felt full, as if something unseen was pressing against it, stretching the quiet to its limits. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Slowly, I took another step back. And then the door handle turned. Not quickly, not aggressively. Slowly, deliberately. A faint creak echoed through the house as the door pushed open just an inch more. My breath caught. The gap was still too narrow to see anything outside, but I felt it. Something was there, watching, waiting. Then a whisper, barely audible but impossibly clear, slithered through the crack in the door. "You left the door open." A cold shiver ran down my spine. The whisper wasn't my voice this time. It was something else. Something older. Something wrong. My legs felt weak. My fingers tingled with numbness. I wanted to move, to slam the door shut, but I was rooted in place, paralyzed by an overwhelming sense of wrongness. And then, beyond the door, something moved. A shadow shifted in the dim morning light. A figure. It wasn't standing. It was crawling. A long, distorted limb slid into view, its pale, twisted fingers pressing against the floorboards just beyond the doorway. Slowly, methodically, another limb followed. The fingers curled, gripping the wood. My chest tightened. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. It was coming inside. No, it was already inside. I felt it before I saw it. A presence behind me. Right behind me. The air turned ice cold. My skin prickled with the unmistakable sensation of being watched. No, being claimed. I couldn't turn around. I wouldn't turn around. My own instinct screamed that if I looked, if I acknowledged it, it would become real. "Close the door," the whisper breathed against my ear. But I couldn't tell if it came from behind me or from inside my own head. My vision blurred at the edges. My pulse roared in my skull. The silence had become unbearable, pressing into me like a weight, crushing, suffocating. Then a sound, not from the door, not from behind me, from above. A slow, deliberate creak. The ceiling. My stomach lurched. Every muscle in my body screamed at me not to look. But I did, and I saw it, clinging to the ceiling like an inverted spider. Its body was wrong, stretched too thin, its limbs bending at unnatural angles. Its face, my face, was an empty void, two gaping holes where eyes should have been. And then it smiled, a sickening, twisted grin that stretched too wide, revealing nothing but blackness. "You're in the wrong place." The whisper wasn't in my ear anymore. It was inside my head. The thing on the ceiling lunged. I screamed, and the silence swallowed me whole. I don't remember hitting the ground. I don't remember if I even fell. All I know is that, for a moment, there was nothing. No air, no sound, no sensation. Just a void, a complete absence of existence. Then I woke up. I was lying on my back, staring at the ceiling. But it wasn't my ceiling. It was smooth, featureless, stretching on infinitely in every direction, like an empty sky with no light, no shadows. I sat up, my body moving sluggishly, like I was underwater. My limbs felt numb, disconnected, as if they weren't entirely mine. That's when I noticed the whispers. They weren't coming from anywhere specific. They were everywhere, layered, overlapping, murmuring things I couldn't understand. Some were distant, others so close they felt like they were inside my skull. And then the silence spoke. "You have always been here." My breath hitched. The voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It vibrated through my bones, deeper than sound, something primal, something absolute. I scrambled to my feet, panic gripping my chest. The floor beneath me was solid, but I couldn't see it. It was like standing on nothing. I turned, and my house was there. The front door, the hallway, the staircase leading to my bedroom. But it was wrong. The colors were faded, almost drained of life. The edges of the walls blurred, shifting subtly, as if the entire place was breathing. Then I saw it. A figure stood just inside the doorway. Tall, motionless, watching. I didn't need to see its face. I already knew what it would look like. Me, or what was pretending to be me. A sickening wave of recognition rolled through me. It took my place. I wasn't in my house anymore. I was in its house. And I wasn't alone. The whispers grew louder. Shapes flickered at the edges of my vision. Things just out of reach, shifting in and out of reality. Then, the figure in the doorway moved. Not walked, not stepped, glided. Its head tilted slightly, mimicking curiosity, as if studying me. Then it opened its mouth, and my own voice came out. "Why did you look?" A sharp, searing pain exploded in my skull. My knees buckled. The world around me rippled, as if reality itself was unraveling. I gritted my teeth, pressing my hands to my ears. But it didn't matter. The voice wasn't outside. It was inside. It had always been inside. Then, the figure stepped closer, and the whispers stopped. A silence deeper than anything I had ever known swallowed the space around me. I looked up, and it was right in front of me. I saw my own reflection in its hollow eyes. And then it smiled, not just with its mouth, with mine. "You never left." And the silence consumed me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The silence wasn't just around me. It was inside me, filling every space where my thoughts, my voice, and myself used to be. The figure, the thing, that wore my face only stared. It didn't need to speak anymore. I already knew what it wanted me to understand. I was never supposed to leave. The realization sent a shudder down my spine. This wasn't just a nightmare. It wasn't a haunting. It was a replacement. I had never escaped the silence. Something else had, and now I was here, wherever here was. I took a step back, my legs trembling beneath me. The figure didn't move. It only watched, waiting. Then, the walls of my house, or what I thought was my house, began to shift. The hallways stretched impossibly long. The doors twisted, bending at unnatural angles. The stairs spiraled upward into an infinite void. The furniture dissolved into shadows, melting into the floor. I wasn't in my home. I was inside something else. The silence pulsed, alive, shifting the space around me, reshaping reality into something unrecognizable. The thing that wore my face tilted its head, and then it spoke. "Do you want to go back?" The words were simple, but I knew they were a trap. I wanted to scream, "Yes, yes, let me go back." But something inside me, something deeper than fear, hesitated. Go back where? To my home? To my life? Or to something that only looked like it? The silence stretched between us, waiting for my answer. And in that moment, I realized the truth. I never escaped that night. I hadn't made it out of my room. I hadn't run. I hadn't slammed the door. I had been taken. Whatever had come into my house that night, whatever had whispered my name, turned the door handle, moved through the silence, hadn't been trying to scare me. It had been replacing me, and it had succeeded. I wasn't the one outside, looking in. I was inside the silence, and something else was out there, living my life, wearing my face. No one would ever know. No one would ever suspect. The thing that looked like me smiled wider, and it whispered the last thing I would ever hear. "You were never real." The silence closed in, and then nothing. I woke up, or at least, I think I did. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. My room was exactly as I remembered. Same walls, same furniture, same dim glow of the morning light filtering through the curtains. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream, a vivid, gut-wrenching nightmare. But then, the silence. It was too thick, too unnatural. The world outside my window was motionless. No birds, no wind, no distant hum of life. I sat up slowly, my pulse pounding in my ears. My body felt off, light, as if I wasn't entirely solid. My hands trembled as I placed them on my lap. Then I turned to my nightstand, and my blood ran cold. My phone was there, exactly where I had left it before I fell asleep. The screen was on, a single notification displayed. You left the door open. A cold, creeping horror slithered up my spine. I turned my head toward my bedroom door. It was open, not wide open, just a sliver, a gap, A shadow moved past the opening. Not fast, not sudden, slow, deliberate. I couldn't breathe. My body refused to move, but every cell in me screamed that something was wrong. Then a voice, soft, familiar. "Are you awake?" It was my voice. The breath caught in my throat. My fingers dug into my bed sheets. The voice came from a hallway. "You shouldn't have woken up." The gap in the door widened, just slightly, enough for me to see something. An eye, my eye, watching, waiting, smiling. I choked on my own breath, my heartbeat hammering against my ribs. I wasn't alone in my room. I wasn't alone in my own skin. The thing in the hallway let out a slow, quiet laugh, and then in my voice it whispered, "Go back to sleep." The door slammed shut, and the silence swallowed everything. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat there rigid, my breath coming in shallow gasps, staring at the door that just slammed shut. The silence was suffocating, pressing against my skin like a living thing, waiting for me to make a move. The whisper, my whisperer, still echoed in my mind. "Go back to sleep." But I wasn't asleep. Was I? I reached for my phone with trembling fingers, my heart hammering so loudly it felt like the only sound left in the universe. The screen flickered as I unlocked it. No service, no Wi-Fi, just the same notification. "You left the door open." A lump formed in my throat. My fingers hovered over the screen, unsure of what to do. I tried opening the messaging app. It wouldn't load. I tried calling someone. Anyone? Nothing. I forced myself to take a deep breath. Think. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But then, what was it? I turned my gaze back to the door. It stood there, closed, but I could feel something on the other side. Watching. Waiting. I had to get out of here. With slow, careful movements, I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, my bare feet touching the cold floor. My body felt strange, too light, like I wasn't fully here. I stood. The floor beneath me felt off, like walking on something that wasn't entirely solid. I took a cautious step toward the door, my breath hitching as it would creak beneath me. The silence shifted. It felt closer, like something had just noticed. I froze, my pulse hammering in my skull. My hand hovered over the doorknob. If I opened it, what would be waiting for me on the other side? I swallowed hard and braced myself. Then I turned the handle. The door swung open, and the hallway was wrong. It wasn't the hallway of my house. It was endless. The walls stretched out impossibly far, fading into a distant darkness. Doors lined each side, identical to mine, each slightly ajar, each humming with an unseen presence behind it. I stepped forward. The air shifted. Something in the dark moved. A shadow flickered at the edge of my vision. My breath caught in my throat. I turned and saw myself, standing at the far end of the hallway. Still, motionless, watching, waiting. My other self smiled, and in my exact voice it whispered, "You never left." The hallway collapsed. The walls closed in. The silence screamed. And I fell through nothing, fell into the silence. And then I woke up in my bed, again, staring at the ceiling, the door slightly open, and the silence waiting. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The room was the same. My bed, my nightstand, my phone still beside me. The morning light filtering through the curtains. But something was off. The air felt too still, too heavy. I turned my head toward the door. It was open, just a sliver. A shadow flickered past a gap. Not quickly, not suddenly, slowly, deliberately. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Then a whisper, "Are you awake?" It was my voice. My fingers clenched into the sheets. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. I wanted to scream, but I didn't, because deep down I knew something was waiting, and it had been waiting for a long time. Then the door creaked open. Not much, just enough. And in the darkness of the hallway, I saw it. A figure. Tall. Wrong. And it was smiling. My own face. My own eyes. But empty. And then with my own voice, it whispered, You left the door open, and the silence swallowed everything.